Stop.
All right, so time for us to get started.
Yes, that's all.
All right, announcements before I start sharing more stuff. I don't quite know where that was going. We have a lot going on this week. We are in the process of doing absolutely everything. So user stories are due by tonight. To give you a sense of what that's going to look like, my goal is to be able to give you feedback on those user stories so that you know if you're on the right track with your development or not. Do you have an understanding of what you are going to be producing from the client's perspective? From there, you're going to be creating scenarios and then tasks within GitHub. I'm not going to be monitoring that part quite as closely because that's kind of where each of these groups is going to diverge a bit. I want to make sure that we're all producing the same thing, but the way we're going about that production is not something that I should really have my hands in too much. That is going to be a lot of you talking to your group, figuring out how you want to do it. And from there, you'll figure out when you meet the client, does your application meet the client's needs? I just want to make sure that we all know what we're doing. As part of this, I've had a number of people come to my office and not really know what they are creating. Nothing bad on them on that part. I think that confusion is probably pretty class-wide. So I wanted to go over exactly what it is that you should be making to hopefully get you a better idea of what that final product looks like. Duplicate now. And I wrote a very basic user story for adding a class. I said, as a user, I want to add a class so that I can visualize it. Very simple, client-centered, client-focused. There's nothing technical about it. I want to be able to add a class so that eventually with this UML diagram, I can see and look at the structure of the classes that are embedded in my code. I want a visual representation of that structure. From a client's perspective, I don't care how that's done. I just want that functionality to be there. A scenario that might come from that user story, and there's a problem with this scenario, I'll ask you about it in a moment, but I say, given that I'm on the main menu, when I type add class followed by the name of the class, then a class is created with that name. So we're starting to get a little bit more technical, but also even still from the user's perspective, I want to be able to see that that class is created. What does that mean in the case, in the scope of a command line application? You get some kind of prompt or something that tells you that that class was created. Note that this is still not technical enough for implementation because we don't know what does it mean to create a class with that name. What data structure are we using? What is storing this? How do we access it? None of that is embedded within the scenario. That's what's going to become the task. So as we take this scenario and start to move it toward being a task, we'll figure out, okay, to store all of these classes, it's going to be in a list of some kind. What kind of list should it be? Should I make an array of these? Should I make a linked list of these? What are the pros and cons of doing it this way versus that way? What should the underlying representation of this list of classes be? That's the discussion that happens as you move from scenarios to tasks. But what you should be thinking about making is some kind of command line application. So as you launch your application, you should see something like, welcome to this team's command line UML editor. Some kind of introductory message that shows that you correctly launched the application. Then you will see some kind of prompt. I've used dash dash greater than. You can use whatever makes the most sense. Dash greater than, dash 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 greater than, underscore underscore under, whatever you want, whatever you think looks the best, makes the most sense. This was just something that I threw together as a prompt of some kind. The user would then type one of the commands of one of the functionalities of the requirements that are listed in sprint 1. So they would type add class person. And now you can see this is not a prompt. This is not something the user entered. This was something that your command line printed to say the class person has been created. And underneath the hood somewhere, there would be an object that was instantiated or and added to a list for that object that contains some information about this. So there's an underlying data representation that I'm not showing because that is on you to figure out how is that going to be accomplished. All the user sees is, all right, it's been created. Great. After this print, we get back to the user prompt. It tells us, all right, the user can now enter some information. So now we would say, all right, I want to list the existing classes. So now we have a different way of showing, here is one of the classes. I have a star that denotes that what follows is the name of that class. Person is the only class that has been created since this was launched. Now I want to add a field to this class. So I would type add field person age. That would say I want to add the field age to the class person. Maybe this order, maybe you don't like this order. Maybe you don't like this command. It'll be up to you to figure out exactly what those commands look like, but we need the functionality to be able to add a field to an existing class. What does that look like? What should they be doing for that? How does that change the underlying data representation of your UML? The underlying structure you're using to store that information. Does this clarify hopefully a little bit of what people need to be creating? It's just a command line application, so there's nothing graphical, there's nothing visual outside of some text-based or ASCII-based representation of what are the components of these classes. You can use ASCII separators, so it's like a plus equals 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 plus, something like that to separate. If I say something like list all of the information, and then we have the class information, followed by a separator, followed by a class and some information, followed by a separator. The user, for instance, should be able to type help to get a sense of, okay, the help menu should tell you how do I construct each one of these commands so that I can do this functionality. You shouldn't require the user to be able to read your mind for what works and what doesn't. They didn't develop the application, they're just trying to use it. So the very first thing you can anticipate Tony doing when he sits down with your application is typing help. You should not have to walk him through the use of your application. If you're standing over his shoulder, type this, now type this, now type this. That's not how a user uses an application. They just open it and have to figure out how to do it. So you should be taking a step back and saying, is the application that I put in front of you usable? Were you able to figure out what to do based off of just interacting with it? Are there questions or clarifications that I can make about either anything that's here, just kind of a walkthrough of what this looks like, how this maps to the requirements, the Sprint 1 requirements that are listed on campus? So next steps. Once the user stories are submitted tonight, Hunter and I are going to be looking over them first thing tomorrow, and we're going to be figuring out, are there any holes in these user stories? Did you get all of the functionality? Is it specific enough? Note that it's interesting that when I say something like the user story that I have here, note how it's vague. This applies to any class that I want to add. I want to be able to visualize any class that's part of this. And yet it's specific enough that it has to do with exactly the adding a class. I want to be able to add a class so that I can visualize it. It's vague, but it works for each class. I can understand the functionality that needs to be there and why it needs to be there. So if I can't get that understanding out of a user story, then I will ask you to clarify that user story. For this first sprint, I will allow an additional submission of these first user stories with the feedback that Hunter or I give you. So don't agonize over trying to make them absolutely perfect, but do give it your best reasonable shot by tonight. Yeah.
So do we have to specifically submit a document with all of them, or are you just gonna go into that Discord channel and look through them?
Whatever makes sense. I would be able to determine, for instance, if a bunch of people have posted a bunch of user stories, I'll go back through that history and look at and compile the user stories. If you submit some kind of text document with all of them compiled from everybody, that's what I'll refer to. I'll make sure that, everybody contributed to them. That doesn't even necessarily have to be the case. If one person posts a bunch of user stories, I will assume that you all worked on them. remember that your first peer review is going to be due tomorrow. So I will be getting that up tomorrow as well, so that you can go fill that in with how has it felt to work in these groups? Has everybody been pulling their weight and communicating? Even if they haven't been able to pull their weight, are they at least communicating with you about, I have these other requirements going on this week. I may not be able to do as much this week, but I will do more next week. Something like that, it's enough communication to know what's going on in that person's life. So that will be tomorrow. Wednesday's class is going to be lab time for all of you to make progress on this. And that's going to be true for the rest of the quarter. No more lab periods are going to have any content associated with them. It's hard enough when you're in a group of 5 or 6 people to find time that all of you can meet together. I've already seen this in Discords when everybody says, we all have different schedules. It's really hard for us to meet. When you set up a meeting, only 3 of the members can be there, or something came up for a 4th and or 5th member. To try to alleviate as much of that as possible, the lab periods are going to be a time when you can all work together on this. And I recognize just how much work each of these sprints is going to be. That's time you have access to me. That's time you have access to each other for planning and just getting a bunch of stuff done. These other class periods are going to be time to learn about software engineering kind of in general. So remember, quiz on Thursday, full sheet of notes, front and back are allowed. I'm going to aim for that quiz to not feel like a full exam, although I don't know, with 50-minute classes, maybe my quizzes are more like other classes' exams. I don't know how that works. It won't feel like one of my exams. My exams can be kind of rough. Okay, question.
Will there be any other chunks of the spring between now and then, kind of your stories for you today?
Nope. At this point, you're going to be free to get stuff done until a week from Wednesday, which is when you have your client meeting. So you need to have enough to demo to Tony a week from Wednesday. It doesn't have to be 100% complete. Maybe there are some side cases that aren't quite done yet. Maybe there is a feature that isn't fully done quite yet. But that demo will be some score between 1 and 10 that'll be based on, we'll talk about this probably ahead of time, but professionalism and just how easy to use is the application. It's more so looking at the design of the application rather than is absolutely everything there. How was it presented? Did it seem like a professional team developed a professional application that is most of the way done and is ready to present in some capacity? Excellent. Hopefully that puts people at a little bit more ease about what's required so that you can actually visualize what that looks like. Any other questions before we start a discussion? Yeah.
What is the whole period of Thursday?
Yeah, it's only the only thing that I'm planning to do on Thursday. So yeah, no additional lecture. But I will give you the whole time for it. Okay, I'm gonna write my notes on chapter 2 so that we can have a little bit of a discussion. There's not quite as much worth talking about here, I think, as there was in chapter 1. Chapter 1 was long, but the first part of that chapter that was covered was culture. So I want to ask people what they think a strong team culture is, or what does a strong team culture look like, and how can you contribute to a strong team culture? What are people's thoughts?
Number one is communication. That's part of the culture.
Yeah.
Environment, how you can work with your teammates, how you can solve problems, how you can dispute those problems. Maybe.
How does culture handle change? That would be the other question that I could throw at people. How does a strong culture deal with change?
They're adaptive to change and like everyone's willing to go out of their way and like overcome like obstacles.
Yeah. Yeah, we have one comment on Zoom as well about being open to change, but not being kind of being closed to radical change. Yeah, the book does mention this, so you want to be open to small changes so that you hear people's ideas and are willing to adapt their ideas into your existing culture, but you don't want someone to come in and completely change or yank the culture radically in one direction or the other, because that can change or destroy the existing culture. You want to adapt to changes in your team rather than radically change it. Another question I might have for you is, how can culture be self-selecting? And by that, I just kind of mean, how do you get more of the existing culture? If you're trying to interface with what you think is a strong culture, what effect does that have on you? If you interface with a toxic culture, what effect does that have on you? Yeah,
Well, self-sizing culture will just attract people, other engineers that want to work in that kind of like strong culture team.
right.
If they are professional and want to be in an aggressive environment, tough environment, they'll prefer the team without those.
Who ends up in a toxic environment?
Toxic people.
Either toxic people or people who are so desperate for a job that they can't find, they don't have the options to be in some better culture that works better for who they are. So you end up with people who don't know what they're doing, people who are toxic themselves, who lead by demanding. And so yeah, toxic breeds toxic. So that's what we mean by a culture being self-selecting, is that it attracts the kind of members that are already in it as people who want to join that culture. So make sure that you are being a presence in your team this quarter that is a part of the culture that you want to be a part of. Be the change you want to see in your team. Anyone with experiences with a self-selecting culture like that? Yeah. Any stories? Anyone want to share any aspect of it?
I mean, I would just say like in sports and stuff, just growing up playing football, that like you can just tell the difference between like a losing culture and a winning culture by just like how a head coach leads, because usually like a head coach will like be more demanding, I guess. Like you have to be demanding in a sense, but you also have to be willing to explain the why or like the reasoning behind something. And I think that like losing cultures and toxic cultures don't really do that very well, and they just expect that their way is the highway, and that's the only way that works.
Yeah, sports is a great analogy for this, because there's the team mentality. You are a part of a greater whole. And if the goal of that greater whole how that is led can be the difference between a team that puts their everything into it or a team that just can't wait to get home after the game because I can't wait to get away from these people. You want to share as well?
On my internship, I was surprised by how people were like open to mistakes, I would say.
Yeah.
I made a couple, and one of them was I had to go to the lab and find the media converter for networking. And for my class, I was just told to go and find the power supply. I found the power supplies, I looked at the connector to say, but it turns out to be higher voltage than what it takes, so I tried them. So it was like a couple $100 worth of equipment.
Yeah.
And the word that I heard is, no worries, you made a mistake, it's okay, just don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. How did that feel to be a part of that?
It was nice, it was welcome, because I was hard on myself instead of, just speak out.
Yeah. I find that to be true of a lot of people. If someone makes a mistake, they're beating themselves up way harder than you probably would, even if you were to yell at them and kick them physically. They're doing emotionally to themselves what you could never do to them. You can only add to it. So finding a way to help them to move forward and be less backwards thinking and more forwards thinking, assuming that they're already embarrassed, they're already thinking about how do I learn from that, giving them that initial level of respect will go a long way toward getting the most out of your team. Let's go 1 and then 2.
I think it's just like trying to keep a clear head with every single person and not trying to be like a lot more leeway with nepotism. Because like somebody mentioned about like sports, like dealt with the losing culture because there was a lot of nepotism. There was nepotism within coaching staff not holding each other accountable because some of them were good drinking buddies since college. And then players, like a correlation between players getting the most playing time and whoever's parents were talking to the coaches or giving the most money to booster club the most. And we were just, it just, that kind of nepotism resulted in a losing culture, which is why we were like a 3-17 every single year.
Absolutely. I think that mirrors that very well. So those of you who do have sports experience, it's very relevant in this kind of team-based environment as well. Think about what did you learn from all of the sports experiences that you had about building a winning culture, about how did you treat your teammates? How did they treat you? How did that make you feel? All of that will be relevant.
Might be like a little bit of a stretch, but like jobs and stuff. I mean, I guess I had quite a few of those where like I really liked the environment just because everybody was like super funny and stuff. And then like new manager came and then like it was just not fun anymore and you just don't want to work anymore because
Yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
it's just super
it's very relevant. You want people to be engaged with the process and not just feeling like they have to be, but you make the experience as pleasant as possible, and that will get the most out of the people around you. And if you're all trying to do that, you will all be building each other up. You'll all be producing the best that you possibly can. All right, next topic, mission statements. What do we think makes a good mission statement? What did the book have to say about mission statements?
It's specific, it's not like vague and it's
Yes.
what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so we need some kind of specific or specificity in the mission statement. My favorite mission statement. To do adequately. I remember in Pennsylvania, I was in an apartment complex and they would hang this big banner that said, "Life is good here." Great mission statement. I would walk by and like, life is adequate here, but it's not measurable. It's not, there's no specificity there. You can't tell if they're creating anything or doing anything about life is good here, because it's just so vague. So yeah, learn from my past place of living. What else? What else makes a good mission statement?
I think mission statement can be substituted for the word goal, and that SMART principle is extremely applicable to a mission statement.
Sure.
Where it's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, you can test it and all the other aspects where you can and more empirically measure, do we need this or not? Is this possible? And is this something we even want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to note is it should be accessible from an outside perspective. So those are all great things to incorporate into a mission statement, but be careful of making it so technical that it becomes inaccessible to someone who's not part of that culture. So the challenge that I have for all of you is now to write a mission statement for this quarter's project. I'll be curious to, if some people want to share this at the end, that'd be great. I'm not gonna call on people. But think for a little bit and write a mission statement for the quarter's project.
You said the quarter long project or just like the quarter, like just this quarter?
Yeah, so the UML editor that you are designing. If you were to have a mission statement for, you know, the company that makes this, or the work that you're gonna be doing this quarter. Mission statements are a funny topic. Because I find that when you interface with them, you kind of roll your eyes at whatever mission statements companies have. A lot of them just feel like fluff, that it's not actually what they deliver. Or that it's something that a marketing team wrote. But then I ask someone to write a mission statement and you realize it's actually difficult to come up with one of these that doesn't sound like that, that actually sounds technical, but also accessible, but also it's quite challenging to come up with. Anyone want to share what they've come up with? Sure.
Don't take pass as the final answer.
Don't take pass as the final answer. Interesting, yeah.
Kind of going off of the book's mission statement, we did to work for this, but our team's mission is to increase program understanding for software engineers by creating an easy to use yet descriptive UML diagram editor that works on any platform.
I like it. I like that a lot. So it tells you a lot about, it gives you some overarching design goals that at the very end of the quarter, it's kind of a check mark or I didn't quite get there, but I did some of it. But it's specific, it's measurable in some capacities that help people determine from your team's perspective, did I meet that or not? But also from an outside perspective, I would decide to use your company based on that mission statement, or I can tell what you prioritize based on that mission statement. Let's go 1, 2, 3.
Strive to consistency, not perfection. You know, just like try to get what you know down, not all of it in one go, and then it's not gonna be the end of the world if you're not gonna hit every single check mark every single day. Because if you're doing only that, you're just gonna get burned out.
We should hold ourselves to a reasonable standard. We want to be able to do that, but if it can't happen, we want to be able to have a structure for reprioritization so that we can still deliver the final product. Note that some of these mission statements don't really have to do with a UML editor, or they're kind of life. They read kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Statements of morals, or statements of, try to tie it somehow into the exact product that you're trying to make. How do you incorporate what is important to you with what is the final product? Yeah.
Yeah, it's one I hear at work a lot. It's kind of a funny one. Common mission statement I hear is, why are we doing this? Or to be more specific, why are we doing this way?
Right. Yeah, that's a very important point. So why should someone choose you over someone else? There are going to be lots of software development companies out there that could produce a UML editor for you. Why choose your company? Your mission statement should target that question. Yeah.
I just said our mission statement, our mission is to provide a self-explanatory and concise UML diagram that any user can interact with easily.
Sure. Yeah, it gives you a little bit harder to measure, so to like interact with easily, but at the same time, from an outside perspective, it at least shows that as a client, I would want to use a company that's going to prioritize my ease of use in their product design. That kind of language certainly shows what you care about or what you will prioritize. Excellent. So I like these a lot. Be thinking about how can you craft these kinds of mission statements? Sometimes when your group starts getting off on the wrong foot, going in a different direction, having a mission statement, you can point someone back to that mission statement to say, I don't know if our interaction, I don't know if our planning meeting, I don't know, whatever it is that we're doing is working toward this mission statement, or I'm starting to sense, it can be a nice point to refer back to. Very important one for people's jobs, synchronous and asynchronous meetings. Meetings are the bane of everyone's existence, I think. Even class meetings like this, from a student's perspective, a lot of the time is a why. I'm so bored. What am I supposed to be getting out of this? This is useless. What? Couldn't this be significantly shorter? Shouldn't we go into more detail about this? So let's start with a basic question. When should you arrange for a synchronous meeting with your team this quarter? When does meeting in person at the same time make sense? Note that this could be synchronous in person, it could be synchronous online, but all of you need to be there, all of you need to be present. When should that be? Yeah.
During lab?
Lab, absolutely. That's a good place to start. But what parts of the project? In general, when should you be thinking to, oh, we should have a meeting where we should all be present for this particular concern? 1 and 2?
Like on the requirement and specification stage.
Yeah, when you're doing the requirements and specification, you want to make sure everyone starts off on the same foot. If someone is not present for that meeting, getting them caught up on that is going to be a game of telephone. It's going to require someone interpreting what happened at the meeting, someone summarizing what happened at the meeting, someone communicating what was summarized of what happened at the meeting, and then someone interpreting the summary of. So there's a lot going on that can be misinterpreted between that. So you will remove as much of that as possible when everyone is all there together and present. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in terms of this project, like, or at least our sprints, probably at the beginning of when a sprint is assigned, maybe midway through to check on how we're looking, and then right before the deadline to just see like how far we got, if there's anything I need to not sleep about that night.
Sure. Sure. That's gonna be a very individual based thing as well. How frequently should we be doing this? Some people will want there to be more frequent synchronous meetings. Some people will want there to be less frequent synchronous meetings. So this is a discussion point within your team about how should we plan for the meeting structure for this project? At least let people advocate for how they want to do that. So that you can design something for your whole team that makes sense for everyone and so that everyone feels heard. When is asynchronous communication better than synchronous communication? When does it make sense to hold more like a message board style of communication? Let's go 1 and 2.
When it's stuff like minor, there are things that talking about like, oh, I'm going to implement this feature, whatever ideas for it integrate, where it's not overarching design effects, like how the data is stored with this, how are we going to access this information?
Okay.
Stuff that mainly affects yours and maybe one other person's work, not the whole team's.
Sure. It's a great point.
I would just say like when you're working on separate programming things, or like if you're programming something that like maybe has a little bit of functionality with someone else, that'd be a good time to kind of message back and forth about it.
Right.
If you like really need to, that's time for like 2 people to get in the call.
Yeah.
But I don't think the whole team has to be there for like, hey, we're working on this piece of the project that kind of needs to work together.
Yeah. So that's what scrums are for in the agile mindset. So everyone needs to contribute to this asynchronous scrum, but how you do it and how you communicate from there will be based on who can be useful to the information that you've posted. You don't require everyone to respond to everyone's scrum. That's too much. Too frequently there would be yeah, I have nothing to say or do with that. So it wastes someone's time to actually have to do that. Last question I have for you about the synchronous or asynchronous, what communication should you be expressing or listening for in determining the best meeting times and the best meeting types for your team? How should you be communicating that and what should you be looking for in the teammates?
Be flexible.
Flexibility, yeah, recognizing again that you're working with other people with other desires out of how to meet. But advocate for yourself at the same time. If you feel like you're attending 80% of the meetings and getting nothing out of them and it's just wasting your time, how do you bring that up? How do you discuss that? While still prioritizing your other teammate who might want to meet more frequently. Yeah.
The book said only invite people who need to absolutely be there, so don't waste your teammates' time, so have nothing to do with what you're gonna be meeting about.
Note that we also have a meetings channel in our Discord. So this is absolutely right. Invite people who like to meet more frequently into that meeting and then ask them to summarize the meeting, post it in meetings and say, I will read everything about that. And if there's anything that I need to add to it, I might call an additional meeting, or there might be some follow-up to that we can do asynchronously, if that makes the most sense. But if you start to notice that, there are ways that you can interface with that doesn't step on the toes of someone who wants to meet more frequently, ask questions, work with others more frequently. What was a sidebar? Opens up the book. Control F, side plus one. What is a sidebar? So a sidebar is something that people should be able to say or do in a meeting that says, this is not vital right now. Can this be handled offline or between the people for whom it matters? This doesn't affect all of us. It's an important discussion point, but let's say in the middle of a meeting about who's going to be doing what, we get into a discussion between me and one other member of our team, and we just start going back and forth about how something was designed last time and how we don't want this one part of our project for this sprint to be handled in exactly that way. That's an important discussion to be had, but it doesn't require that everyone be here. So you can say, all right, we're gonna sidebar this for either a future meeting or for you two to meet individually. Let's tackle the next element on our agenda. So very, very important, but determining what should and shouldn't be moved to a sidebar is an important skill so that you can advocate for yourself, advocate for efficient meetings. Because efficient meetings are very important. You want to be in and out and productive again as quickly as possible. How about issue tracking? What is issue tracking? Yeah,
I believe it's just like a register of like major things that have come up that don't work. You need to like keep an eye on with the description of what they are.
yeah. Just like we're gonna be using the built-in GitHub issue tracker for tasks, we're also going to be using them for issues. So you'll separate them into tasks and issues. As you start determining what those issues are, rather than trying to communicate them immediately with the person who's in the middle of something else right now, make an issue for it. And then if you have meetings every once in a while, that can be a consistent thing on that meeting agenda, is let's go over all of the issues that we've tracked so far. Figure out, is it still an issue? What should be done about it and who should be responsible for it? That can be part of a very efficient meeting about that, but it doesn't require that everybody meet as soon as an issue is discovered. You'll just start to keep a log of them. And then last thing I want to cover before I do a little bit more slide work is design documents, pros and cons of design documents, what should we include in design documents, and the really important one, how do we know if a design document is too long and specific or detailed, or too short and too vague. So I want to focus on that as part of our discussion of how can you analyze a design document, determining whether it's too short or too long. What do those look like? What is in common between all design documents that are too short? What is in common between all design documents that are too long?
I
Yeah,
feel like the too long ones go into like too much of the specifics of exactly what you did. Talk about the exact mechanisms you're implementing, like in terms of programming. At least if you have a design document, it tells you exactly how it works step for step, which could be better left to comments in the program, right?
okay, potentially. It depends on what's needed or useful for the implementation. The entire goal of the design is to be used for implementation. So yes, if it's overly complicated, it's going to include so much detail that it might confuse the person who is implementing it. If it's something that's too detailed may say, I want to phrase this. I'll come back to it. I'll come back to what I think about it. But it's something that's too short, by the way.
Didn't meet the requirement.
Doesn't contain all the requirements. Sure, that one's a pretty obvious one to start with, right? We didn't get all the functionality into our design document. That's pretty bad.
Other caps that are too long, it would be like compound features that. They'll look and will. Maybe great for the future, but not now.
Sure, yeah, trying to overscope and plan for more than what we can plan for right now. Because remember, we're using this iterative design. We'll come back to this design document. So trying to plan so much for the future that things are going to change might be better left as vague wording for now, with a note that we will expand upon this once we've done more research, once we get feedback from the client based on a prototype.
I feel like this might apply for both, but like not, like maybe it's just like not getting to the matter or not specifying what needs to be in there. Because like it's too bloated on stuff that doesn't matter, or not descriptive enough about what does matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If a design document says something like, the life is good here, the vague from before, it would be something like, is implemented efficiently and precisely. Something that is vague that isn't check marked. So a design document should start to include the actual technologies that are going to be used for that development. All right, I actually want to do just a very little bit of slide work because today is the first day that you need to start posting your scrums. So I want to at least get through the rest of the Agile process slides so that we know what that looks like. And then my plan for tomorrow is to go over UML diagrams in more detail. That will become much more important once you start thinking about how to graphically produce this UML editor to actually be able to do this. For now, you should do everything you need to do in the command line, but I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with that. So last time we talked about this, we talked about the structure of an Agile team. So we had the product owner, who is going to be me. We have the Scrum Master trying to figure out, making sure that everyone is fully productive in their teams. I don't anticipate that people are going to be taking on these roles specifically. So we are working in iterations, we're delivering user stories, converting those into scenarios, converting those into tasks. Unfinished user stories are kept in a backlog. If you aren't able to get to something, then that is still something that you need to think about for the next sprint. So working it into the next sprint's tasks in some capacity. Tony might come to you and say, I don't like how this is done, you should do it this way instead. That would go into the backlog of something that's going to happen in the next sprint. So we have stories that are implemented by creating tasks for them. One thing to note when you actually do make these tasks in GitHub is we want to have a time estimation for them. We call this time boxing. So we want to give an approximate amount of time that we think this task is going to take. It's easy to be too specific here, so I like to keep them kind of vague. Think of it like small, medium, large. Break them into something that's discrete, something that is reasonably measurable, where you might have something that says small is 1 to 3 hours, medium is 3 to 6 hours, large is 6 to 10 hours. Maybe you have a very large that is more than 10 hours. Something like this. Come up with a system that works for your team for labeling the tasks. When is a user story done? All tasks are done that are associated with that user story. When you write acceptance tests, those acceptance tests all pass. There are no open defects, which means there are no bugs. There are no known bugs associated with that user story. And the product owner says, yes, this does what that was anticipated to do, what you needed to do from the beginning. I won't be doing that as part of this project because that would just be too much work on me for all of the teams, for all of the user stories. But in industry, that's what that looks like. Here's what I really want to cover. So Scrum, we have the associated roles of these very brief meetings. So we're going to be emulating these 15-minute meetings with just forum style posts. But out in industry, a Scrum is a daily 15-ish minute meeting with these associated roles. We have a Scrum Master. The Scrum Master's job is to make sure that we're on track for this meeting to take 15 minutes or less. So if we start getting sidetracked, the Scrum Master will say sidebar, and that just stops that conversation. Says it's important, talk about it after this meeting. Something of the sort. Say, all right, next, who's doing what? So keeping it on task, keeping it efficient. The product owner is going to represent the business purpose, making sure that we're staying on task with regards to the client's priorities. And then you have all of the designers, the developers, and the testers that are part of the development team, the design team, the testing team, to make sure that we are producing what the product owner will eventually validate in an efficient way that Scrum Master verifies. So that's what a 15-minute Scrum typically looks like. If your group has interest in this, I actually recommend finding a 15-minute period where you can hop into a voice chat together. You don't have to be sharing anyone's screens, but just find a way to talk about what have you done? What are you working on? It's going to be better than the forum style posts, because the reasons that can not be so good is that people don't go back. You're worried about the grade item as students. So you're going to go post your own and not read other people's. So you don't have to interface with the other people's posts. At a minimum, make sure that you are reading everyone else's posts. If you post, don't wait to check that again until the next day when you have to post again. The next time someone else posts, go check it again. Make sure you're reading your teammates' roadblocks, asking yourself, can I be helpful? Yeah.
What if one of the groups, like, what if our group wanted to do a 15-minute meeting instead of posting the actual written dialogue of it?
Maybe the Scrum Master then makes a note of that and then posts for everybody in that Scrum so that I would be able to see what that is. So that should be documented in the meeting anyway, who's working on what. So maybe one person just documents it as you're meeting together. That would be a great way to do that. All right. Sprint planning, you should be doing this ahead of Wednesday so that you can make Wednesday as productive as possible. You should have kind of tasks and roles assigned to people, but make sure that you're actually going through the user stories, converting those to scenarios, converting those to tasks, putting those tasks up so that people can check out those tasks from GitHub. I will be looking at that as part of the grade for the first sprint is, are you using your issue tracker? That's called the Kanban board on the sprint. on the grading rubric. So make sure that you are using that. If you're just saying you work on these couple things verbally, then you're not doing that and you will have a significant deduction that is the equivalent deduction to not getting most of your stuff done. This class is very graded on the process, so make sure that you are following the process in most aspects of the process. And even if you don't deliver a earth-shattering UML diagram, that will be okay as long as you're learning about the development process. Yeah,
What did you say it was called in the rubric?
Kanban board, Kanban.
And that's what is,
It's the tasks from the issue tracker.
which is that implemented in Git?
Yeah, and GitHub in the issue tracker. Yeah, that's where I'll be looking for that. Let's see, is there anything super important? Here's the daily scrum or the stand-up that we talked about, done that already. We're not doing a scrum of scrums. Anything really important here? Not really. All right, I think we can call it for the day. I think this gives people stuff to work on. I'll be in my office for at least the next hour. If anyone has any questions or clarifications about the project, interfacing with your team, anything that helps you be productive, I am here for you. Please make use of.